1 million protesters expected in the Dominican Republic for the Independence Day demonstration over suspended elections. Venezuelans marched to commemorate the Caracasazo of 1989, the revolt which opened the way to the Bolivarian Revolution. And the campaigns begin to wind up in Guyana ahead of Monday's crucial general election. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Doris Polo in Quito, and this is From the South. We begin in the Dominican Republic, where a massive protest is underway outside the Electoral Board as the country celebrates Independence Day. Demonstrations have been staged outside of the electoral offices for 12 consecutive days since the municipal elections were suspended on the 16th of February. The protesters have been demanding a clear explanation of what happened on the day. They say they are aiming to bring a million people onto the streets.
We are here because our democracy is in danger. We need to unite to liberate ourselves from this dictatorship and all impunity, where there is no government, but where all the powers, the judicial, the legislative, are not independent. They're all being held hostage. The only thing which is free is our voices and the streets. That's why we're using our voices and the streets, our powerful will that we have, all Dominicans, and we need to continue using them until the end. We will not move from this plaza until they respect our popular will.
President Danilo Medina spoke before the Congress presenting his annual State of the Nation report. Social movements have not only questioned the legitimacy of the elections, but also the president's management after he insisted the country's economy would grow in 2019. He promised a response to the sustained protests.
The Dominican people demand and deserve a response. An acknowledgement of this magnitude cannot be left without explaining or without full explanations. Committed so that the situation becomes clear. We have given support so that the Organization of American States, the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, and the Inter-American Union of Electoral Organizations carried out an independent and rigorous investigation, so that they can provide the Dominican people and the international community an objective investigation to see what impeded the municipal elections from being carried out as scheduled. This has to do with a lamentable and embarrassing that brings us shame and which tarnishes Dominican democracy. Identify completely with the calls of broad sectors of Dominican society, especially the new generations in the sense that are searching to bring out the truth, all of the truth, without shortcuts or restrictions.
Bringing us more is our correspondent Daisy Toussaint, who is at the protest in Santo Domingo.
We are in the Plaza de la Bandera, in front of the Electoral Board on Independence Day in the Dominican Republic. The protesters have been gathering here, as they have for the last 12 days, against the members of the Supreme Electoral Board for what they are calling the Trabucazo 2020, in reference to the Trabucazo, or the big cannon shot of 1844, when the country won its independence. The organizers say they are hoping for 1 million protesters to turn out today to demand a clear explanation of what happened with the suspension of the municipal elections on the 16th of February. So they have been holding these demonstrations for 12 days, calling for the resignation of the members of the Electoral Authority, for transparency, and for guarantees that the people's will and their vote will be respected when the elections are held again on the 15th of March. The organizers have asked people to protest in a calm and peaceful way, as they have done over the past 2 weeks. Various musicians and other personalities have backed the call for this big demonstration on the anniversary of the Dominican Republic's independence. Today, President Danilo Medina has also been given his State of the Nation address, in the middle of this political crisis triggered by the suspension of the elections.
Moving on, let's go live to images as Venezuela is commemorating 31 years since the Caracasazo, when popular mass protests began in response to the neoliberal measures of President Carlos Andrés Pérez and the IMF. That social outbreak shook the country and was met by brutal army repression, leaving thousands of unarmed civilians dead, which in turn triggered a collective awareness initiating the process of the civic military union. The February 27, 1989 1969, Caracasazo is widely remembered as the precursor of the Bolivarian Revolution, which brought Chavez to power nearly a decade later. Our correspondent Leonel Retamal has more from the march in Caracas.
We're in the center of Caracas, where the Venezuelan people have gathered to take part in this commemoration of the 31 years since the Caracazo. This was the political and social revolt that happened in Venezuela at the end of the 1980s and became the spark that led to the Bolivarian Revolution, which brought Hugo Chavez to the presidency in 1998, nearly 10 years after the Caracazo. It was seen as a historic sequence of events, and that's why it's commemorated. People are also remembering the 3,000 or so people who died in that revolt, the exact figures are not known, as a result of the repression unleashed by what is known as the Fourth Republic, and which was eventually replaced by the Bolivarian Revolution. Today's march is also raising slogans around the current situation in Venezuela. For example, we've seen placards saying, "Trump, you are the threat." So the marchers are demanding an end to the US sanctions and economic blockade against Venezuela, which they say are an attempt to bring down the government and which are hurting the ordinary Venezuelan people. In the last few days, the Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza has been at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, where he condemned these unilateral measures as crimes against humanity. And the marchers here certainly support that position taken by their government. We should remember that the Caracazo revolt started as a protest against austerity measures imposed by the IMF. And of course, in this last year, we've seen a new wave of protests against such IMF measures in Chile, in Ecuador, and elsewhere in the region and around the world.
That was Leonel Retamal with that report. In Geneva, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has presented her annual report. Within the report, Michelle Bachelet spoke on the activities of her office in Venezuela, saying she valued the access and collaboration maintained with the Bolivarian government and that progress had been made in the execution of the Technical Cooperation Work Plan. The High Commissioner's office also took note of the release of 14 people in January as a result of the peace dialogue between the government and the opposition.
Recently admitted by the working group on
Venezuela's Vice Minister of Multilateral Issues, Alexander Yanez, presented the country's response, saying the government renews its readiness to cooperate with the Office of the High Commissioner.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, President. We take note of the report read out by the High Commissioner. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela reiterates its serious and quite founded questions related to the methodology used by the Office of the High Commissioner to prepare reports on country situations. Still, a lot needs to be done to have balanced reports that are based on the principles that should rule all the questions related to human rights. Despite this fact, Venezuela renews its readiness to carry out a dialogue and cooperate with the Office of the High Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet. The team of the office in Venezuela has received full support of the competent authorities of the Venezuelan state to carry out its mission with strict compliance with the principles of international law established by the United Nations Charter. Also, we have received the visit of the officials of the office based in Geneva and the regional office for South America to move in that direction. As a result, the Memorandum of Understanding and the work plan signed at the end of 2019 are strengthening cooperation and technical assistance on different issues in human rights, including the development of the second National Human Rights Plan.
Speaking on Wednesday night, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro announced that the government and some opposition sectors will seek to appoint a new National Electoral Council that will be tasked with organizing elections for a new National Assembly later this year.
Both parties intend to find consensus to appoint a new electoral council, which I totally agree with. I say I agree with this new National Assembly, with which we have had and still have major differences, appointing the new electoral council. This National Assembly that also has its own divisions and differences, but if there is a political consensus promoted by the National Negotiation Table, I agree, because these are signs of peace, signs of understanding among Venezuelans. So after a new electoral council is appointed, it should call for elections for the National Assembly. then we should all go out to vote and thus resolve all political disagreements by means of the people's vote, freedom, democracy and participation.
We'll take a short break now. When we come back, South Africans share mixed views on the government's budget presentation. Details after this. Welcome back. Guyana's Governing Partnership for National Unity and Alliance for Change coalition is continuing to campaign ahead of the March 2nd general elections. Hundreds of supporters have taken to the streets dressed in the party's colors, yellow and green, to showcase unity and strength ahead of the polls. Elections were called following a no-confidence motion that was passed in the government in December 2018. Following an unsuccessful appeal, the Caribbean Court of Justice ruled in June 2019 that the no-confidence vote was valid. In a radio interview, Guyana's outgoing President David Granger has detailed his plans for the country should he be re-elected to serve a second and final term on Monday.
We have gained a lot of experience, and we realized where the faults were when we took over in 2015. We understand that education is really the basis of building the human resources in the country. More emphasis will be placed on education, more emphasis will be placed on employment of young people, more emphasis will be placed on creating that equality so that we do not feel that people from the bush are backward, or people from the coast are more progressive. Equality is very important, and we feel that the quality of life is going to be better. We have to make some improvements in public security and in public health. Nowadays, almost every year there's a new threat. It's Zika, or dengue, or chikungunya, or SARS, now we're Corona. So we are much more aware of these international threats.
Now to Africa, where Mali's ambassador has reported to the French Senate on problems caused by the French Foreign Legion deployed on Malian soil. The French troops have been the source of concern and complaints over the breaking of local laws and harassing local people in areas where they operate. They've also been accused of supporting or even being terrorists. France has dismissed claims of rowdy behavior of French soldiers, and not only false but unacceptable, and claims it wants to help the West African nation combat Islamic insurgency.
I'm not used to talking in circles. I will tell you frankly, in these forces there are the officers, there's the normal army, but there are also the foreign legions, and that's where the problem lies. I'm telling you, at times you see them in the red light districts of Bamako. Their bodies completely covered in tattoos, behaving in a way that does not correspond to the national army we know. It makes people afraid. It makes tongues wag and raises questions.
Staying in the region, South African Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has delivered the 2020 budget speech. In his speech, to Parliament, Bawini announced plans to cut public sector wages in an effort to tighten government spending, much to the disappointment of Labour representatives who were against the move. Other austerity measures include requiring all government officials to travel economy class on domestic flights, and the country's foreign ministry is set to close and merge some overseas diplomatic missions, as well as reduce their staff.
Once we get the wage growth under control, we get corruption under control, we get wasteful expenditure under control, we will focus on what we need to focus on. Hiring in important areas such as education, the police, and healthcare.
Well, as the annual budget speech was underway, hundreds of people gathered outside the Parliament building, protesting against high unemployment and also calling on the government not to go ahead with public service wage cuts. However, South Africa's opposition leader Julius Malema commended the new budget, describing the proposed measures as the best the government can do given the country's worsening economic situation.
Well, it is not a very bad budget under the circumstances. We welcome the establishment of the state-owned bank. We welcome the fund as well, a sovereign wealth fund, which both of them are the ideas of the EFF. We are extremely disturbed by reducing the allocation of local government, because local government is at the cold face of all government spheres.
In Latin American news, Bolivia's former president, Evo Morales, received an honorary doctorate in Argentina. Morales traveled to Ushuaia, south of Argentina, to receive the title by the University of Tierra del Fuego. Morales, who has been living in Argentina since December 14th, was recognized by his defense of the rights of the indigenous people, his fight against poverty, and for being a political reference for Latin America. This is the 6th university in Argentina to give Morales an honorary doctorate. During the ceremony, several Argentinian leaders showed their support for Morales. Through a video conference, indigenous leader Milagros Sala said he deserved the doctorate for representing all indigenous people in Latin America and for governing for the poorest in Bolivia. Tati Almeida, a founding member of the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo, said she sends strength to the president of Bolivia and she's sure justice will prevail following the coup against him.
You know the reasons why I am in Argentina. And as I just read a message from someone here that says even in asylum human rights are also being violated, they want to isolate us by now allowing us to return to Bolivia. The US told high officials in Mexico and Argentina that I cannot go back, not even close to the border. The US empire can see that we are united, organized, and mobilized to change Bolivia.
We have more stories coming up, including a look at day 4 of the extradition hearing against Julian Assange in the UK, so stay with us.
March the 2nd, the people of Guyana will elect their 65 members of parliament for the next 5 years. Telesur will be there to bring you all the news on these key general elections. Our special envoy, Alejandro Kirk, will be covering all the developments of before, during, and after the vote. And you can follow the issues and the latest news on our website and social media. Guyana Decides 2020. Only on Telesur, the news source of Latin America and the Caribbean.
Welcome back. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is once again before the Woolwich Court in southeast London for the 4th day of his extradition hearing. His defense attorney, Edward Fitzgerald, has so far argued that placing him in a glass box is infringing on his right to a fair trial. Assange is utilizing headphones but is unable to hear the proceedings properly or consult with his attorneys. The WikiLeaks founder is facing extradition to the US for releasing documents in 2010 which exposed Washington's war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, seen by many as an attack on the free press. Our London correspondent Pablo Navarrete spoke with some of the few remaining journalists who have committed themselves to covering the Assange extradition case.
So we're here outside the trial of Julian Assange, and it's a very interesting moment in British politics because UK officials are currently tweeting and talking at conferences about the UK's respect for press freedom around the world and how they want to spread it and how it's essential to democracy. Yeah, here in London, in the capital of this country, we have a journalist on trial under some of the most draconian measures I've seen. So it's a real litmus test for the degree to which the British state actually respects journalism.
Well, the British government has this rhetoric about defending freedom of expression, freedom of the press, but what we are seeing here in the court is first an attack on Assange. They are violating his rights. They aren't allowing him to speak with his attorneys. I think that the case will end tomorrow, and it will do so without Assange being able to sit alongside his lawyers to be able to direct his case.
And Pablo Navarrete has more from London.
Here outside the Woolwich Crown Court, it's day 4 of the Julian Assange extradition trial. It was set for 5 days, but there are reports that it will be ending early today. Now, this is the trial that will initiate to see whether Julian Assange will be extradited to the US to face 18 charges, including espionage, which would mean that he could face up to 175 years in prison. As we know, in April, he was arrested by the British police from the Ecuadorian embassy, where he had been given a political assignment initially by the Rafael Correa government, but under Lenin Moreno, the current president of Ecuador, this was rescinded and he was effectively expelled from the embassy and has been held next door here at the Belmarsh High Security prison. We've heard from his lawyers how on the first day of the trial he was handcuffed 11 times, strip searched twice, and there have been grave concerns about his treatment whilst in Belmarsh, and also a lot of criticism of the behaviour of the judge and in general the legal process up to now by the British state. So this is day 4 of the extradition trial for Julian Assange to determine whether he will be extradited to the US to face charges of espionage for releasing classified US government material.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average has again fallen dramatically by 800 points on fears of the spread of the coronavirus. Markets are reeling after the U.S. reported its first coronavirus case involving a person who did not travel to an infected country or knowingly interact with someone who did. Chinese health authorities have managed to stem the number of new infections, but worried investors are concerned over the cases in other countries. The S&P 500 stock index has lost more than 6% in just the last 2 days after hitting record highs last week. The African Union, along with various regional health organizations, have decided to hold a series of workshops to train health workers across the continent to respond to the novel coronavirus outbreak. In preparation against the possible outbreak, 35 member states from the African Union sent their representatives to the training in Abuja, Nigeria. The training workshop was the first of its kind by the African Union in collaboration with other international partners, including the World Health Organization and the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
WHO, Afro, WHO, EMBO, Africa CDC, West African Health Organization, we all come together, to decide on how best to approach this situation, share information. And of course, we should not forget that politically too, our officials, the decision makers have also seen the need to invest in health.
If this virus is going to enter any country, it is going to come through a point of entry. It is going to fly in or come in via ship or come in via a road border, a land border. And therefore, If we have people who are vigilant, who are trained, who have a high index of suspicion, that is our first barrier that we have erected. Then the second part is, if somebody becomes sick with the coronavirus, he will either be sick in his community and remain in his community, or he will show up in a health facility. And if you notice, most disease outbreaks are amplified around health facilities.
In some lighter news, Nicaragua is hosting the Central American Film Festival, or CICA, this year, featuring 8 movies from the region.
Little by little, all the auditoriums of the National Film Institute filled up with visitors, the general public and festival organizers. The festival kicked off with a screening of In the Search of the White City by Honduran filmmaker Javier Suazo.
This is a festival of Central American cinema that allows us to strengthen ties between broader nations, but also to share histories, share our culture, identity, and tell about the landscape of our countries.
Nicaraguan filmmakers also praised the event, saying that it's a time for regional talents to shine.
As a filmmaker, I am excited and happy because it seems that cinema is a suitable medium for Central Americans to get to know each other.
The festival opens its doors to all, free of charge, allowing Nicaraguans from all walks of life to enjoy the work of regional filmmakers and learn about the people, culture, and history of Central America.
This festival is important for us because it displays the efforts of the various countries that bring their feature films to our screens. This is a place where they can stand out in this art form.
The festival runs until the 3rd of March and will feature 8 films from countries including El Salvador, Guatemala, Costa Rica, and Belize.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on Starsat channel 461 in South Africa and channel 539 in Nigeria. And join us on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thanks for watching.